The resident row.
Senate sitting on my stuff. Senate sitting
All
on my
your
stuff.
bills, all of them.
Well, the two that matter.
The two that matter, the citizens.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody out. Appreciate you joining us tonight. Obviously, we convene a Roy City Council special work session. Our purpose is to spend a little bit of time today discussing a proposed general plan. And so I want to recognize that it's February 22nd, 2022. As Council Member Wilson said, it's 22/02/2022 on Tuesday, on a Tuesday. So we definitely have a lot of twos going with us today. The time is 5:30. I want to recognize that we have Councilmember Sophie Paul with us, Councilmember Scadden with us. We have Councilmember Joe Paul with us. We have Councilmember Wilson with us, and Councilmember Jackson is not here with us. And we have Youth Councilmember Parker with us. So appreciate you joining us today. Okay, with that, Council, let me just make a couple of comments as we enter into this. Because this is a special work session, the focus of this conversation has to stay within the general plan. Although we may have like to talk about other things, and as a council member, since we convene, because we advertise this as a council discussion, talking about general plan, we have to stay on topic, okay? That's not to suggest that if you have something that may be corollary to the general plan, we can't talk about it. That's okay. But if you want to talk about some ordinance that has nothing to do with general plan, we have to save that for another meeting, okay? So with that, what I'd like you to do is we're going to let Steve kind of do the introductions and bring the contractor up. Council, would you consider taking one of these chairs up front? That way we can get on the other side of this table and allow the presentation and discussion to kind of be directed towards the camera. So with that, we'll go ahead and move. And Matt, I'll have you work that recorder. Is that okay right there?
Mirror image.
I don't know. Do we spread out a bit? Do we? I mean, I have to sit by Joe Paul at all the meetings. So maybe I'll
Go ahead.
try to get hands on it.
I did shower and put on deodorant.
Is that musk that I'm smelling?
Hey, thank you, Mayor. Now that we've all kind of gotten situated and reseated, and sorry, Dan, you have to reorganize all that back
I
up.
know, all my stuff.
Did you want it?
I'll run up there if I feel desperate.
I can bring it to you.
Got it, thanks.
Okay. Thanks for coming, everybody. I wanted to introduce our consultant. Landmark Design is who was awarded this contract. And just so you know, in 2018, so that's how long this project has been going on. We got Sam Taylor here, who's representing Landmarks. Mark, I'm gonna murder his last name. Vlasic. Couldn't be here tonight, more towards budget constraints, because this has been going on since 2018. My budget actually ran out in 2020. So they've agreed to come and finalize this on the shoestring budget I have left. So with that, I'll turn some time over to Sam, who will go over a presentation, which I've given everybody a copy of. Audience members should have one as well.
Not actually letting me share screen. I'm on the Zoom.
IT guy just want me to jump.
All right, technical difficulties.
Actually, I don't usually.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that little glitch there. Thank you, council, for having myself and Steve tonight for this. We are been hard at work on this for the last 2 years, and really been working to create a great vision for your community. You've already started that process even years earlier, and with the Focus Roy document that came out. And this is really intended to be a continuation. It's intended to be something for you to take your community forward over the next, 5, 10, even longer number of years. But before I dive into what we've produced to date, I do want to just kind of go over a couple of quick things about what the general plan is and our process. So first off, general plan is primarily a vision document, not ordinance, but its intended purpose is to establish a vision for the community to follow. They can last as long as 20 years, but they're usually updated more frequently than that. Every few years is ideal. The core of the material of the plan is to really establish the community's values. It looks at your community from inside out, what is working, what is not, particularly in areas such as land use, transportation, economic development, and housing. Those are usually the main core components of the general plan. There are sometimes other components, but those are the ones that are required by state law and are the kind of the meat and potatoes of the plan. It's important to know that the general plan also does not create regulations or requirements. It is not ordinance, as I said, but it can recommend new policies or regulations as implementation strategies. So it's really here is a tool for the Planning Commission, for yourselves, to be able to enact policy based on the community's vision going forward. As I mentioned earlier, we're building on some previous efforts. So not long ago, you had the Focus Roy visioning effort, I guess you call it that, Steve, which established basically a vision for redeveloping your downtown area, as well as implementing mixed use at the station, the front runner station area. And so that ultimately led to the implementation of mixed use codes for those areas, which were recently adopted. And we're also looking at the framework that was established in your transportation master plan, which wasn't that long ago. So some of these more recent efforts have all fed into this. And the general plan is really there to kind of create a bridge between all those components, as well as other aspects of the city. So our process through this, we've gone through a number of different things we've done along through this. So we had an advisory committee at the beginning of the process that we did some scoping with, and we did also some other scoping efforts with some focus groups. We had a couple of living room sessions with different resident groups, high schools, classes. We had a booth at the Roy Days Fair. And we also had an online visual preference survey. And so we were using sort of these different avenues to kind of get a pulse for what residents were saying and what they wanted to see differently. From there, we developed the draft plan and refined that a few times. And then we took that to a public open house and the Planning Commission as well. And based on the comments that we received back from those groups, as well as from the ongoing comments we've received online, brought it to the draft that you have in front of you today. So we're at this point where we're hoping to get this wrapped up and moved hopefully towards adoption. I'm going to go through quickly just an executive summary of what's in the plan. This is something that is adapted from a previous presentation that was given to the Planning Commission a few months back, but should provide a pretty good overview of what the what we've come up with for you in this document. So in chapter 1, it really gets into the background and introduction, why this plan is important. Also, this is what we heard from the public and through those different avenues I discussed. We talked with the community. We heard some common themes that came out of it. First of all, people actually really liked living here, but the things that they struggle with is they're concerned about increasing traffic. They're concerned about their neighborhoods kind of not being upkept or sort of there's a negative perception about Roy that many of them felt that people from outside of the community kind of look down on this place, which is unfortunate because it's actually a really great town. I've actually really grown to love it as I've researched it and dove into your history. And so, part of eliminating that negative perception was, addressing things like, reinvigorating your downtown, dealing with the traffic issues and just beautifying the community. So, I won't go into all the details on these slides, but as I mentioned, we had our advisory committee, the webpage, focus group meetings, and some of the discussions that came out of that, and the visual preference survey and the Roy Days Fair. Chapter 1 kind of concludes with just the general. Actually, I'm not sure chapter 1 talks about the demographics. That's probably in the appendix. But there is a section of your demographics, your population. You're becoming a built-out community, and with that comes a different perspective than a greenfield community. There's a lot of benefit to that because now your attention can turn from how do we deal with all this unburgeoned growth to improving quality of life for our residents. So that's a really interesting component that you have. And your population is stabilizing. So, what are the needs that come from that in terms of your provided services, to recreation detail, and how that will be affected. So those demographics play into how land use should be considered and the economics. Chapter 2 is really the meat of the plan, and that's where we establish sort of an overarching vision statement on the first page, which kind of encapsulates hopefully what takes what we've heard from the public and transforms it into a vision for what you can become as a community. And then from there, we established 8 guiding principles to kind of develop the plan from there. And so there were, first of all, building on the great established pattern that you have already in your history. You really have a rich, deep history that's quite unique compared to, I've researched a few different communities along the Wasatch Front, and you have a great history here. And there's this clear pattern of how your community has developed as a result of that. Principle 2, leveraging as I mentioned, you're almost built out. There's the positive characteristics of becoming a built out community. What does that mean for you moving forward? Principles 3 and 4 really get at your downtown and your city core and your transit areas, and how can you leverage those exciting and energetic place, really the soul of your community. Principles 5 and 6 really get at your neighborhoods. How do we protect and improve your existing neighborhoods, especially when we're proposing all this mixed use development in the core? How does that, what sort of ramifications does that trickle down to within the residential areas around it? So many communities, when they have had a major growth spurt in their downtowns, the surrounding neighborhoods have really kind of fallen by the wayside as a result. And so how do we strengthen those neighborhoods and prevent that from happening? And also, how do we help neighborhoods express themselves? Some of the greatest cities in America have put a really strong emphasis on developing characterized specific. People, you ask people where the city was, I'm in this. It's really cool. It helps to set people be able to say. Seven, similarly, talking about neighborhoods, but also just what else within your community is functioning as a system. I'll get into that. And particularly looking at different modes, huge problem of why we have so much traffic issues is we're stuck in our cars, and there's so many opportunities, especially as an urbanizing region, utilize various modes of transportation within the community and the region. So what we kind of did to kind of analyze all these, or put all these principles into motion, is we analyzed the different layers of your community. What is really making up the structure here? And, it starts with those historic development patterns, where you've been in your past, and then look at, where you want to head in the future as well with the growth areas, and also examining the different systems that you have. You have, corridors, which are your primary transportation routes. You have nodes and gateways, which are those really kind of hubs of activity, or places that give a sense of landmark or a sense of arrival to those coming into your community. There's the green structure, which is the parks and the trails and the open space. And then there's this last layer, which is the neighborhoods and districts, which I've talked about. So the plan goes through each of these layers, looks at, how did your community develop historically, and how has that influenced what's on the ground today. It identifies roughly the main growth, it also identifies where your other business centers are. Categorize those and provide guidelines for how each of those might take shape. Looking at your major corridors, obviously 56 South is a hot issue right now because it's widening. But how does that actually, what sort of impacts does that actually have on the community? How does that really transform from being more than just a widening project? Can it be multimodal and incorporate transit and bikeways and things like that? And also, how does the land use adjacent to that corridor take place and shape and form? Those are all things to be considered in how those develop. So those recommendations. So, making these corridors really more than just the automobile, but it's about people and how do people move through these parts of our community. As I mentioned, nodes and gateways, they are really about those hotspots of activity. They often occur at key intersections or just entries to the community. And there are different ways in which those can be developed in a way that really makes them important landmarks and conveys a sense of arrival or a sense of place. And you can see there's different examples of places both near and far. The green structure, as I mentioned, gets at parks and trails primarily. You have a lot of natural open space, like some of the communities up against the mountains do, but opportunity for open space corridors that can be preserved and enhanced along the rail corridors and the power corridors and the canals. And these are all really interesting routes that can lend themselves to trails And the real challenge from there is then getting linkages east-west, because all these corridors seem to run north-south, and that's generally the challenge throughout all of Utah. But where there are opportunities, particularly along those major corridors, some of those connections can be made as well. And then how do we, also create those connections between the parks as much as possible, so that people can access their parks by walking to them or biking to them. That's really what people want to be able to do generally with parks. Is, there's one close to my house, how do I get to it in a reasonable manner without using my car, hopefully. And so there's a significant portion of the plan which examines these systems and provides recommendations for them. And I'll get into some of that detail a little later. The last layer, the neighborhoods layer, I know as we've gone through the open houses and heard from some of the comments from the community, people ask, well, where do these names come from? Probably half of them are actual names that come from historic places that we've found in looking through your history books. And the names aren't really that important. You could name it whatever you want. But the concept is, by focusing in, dialing in on specific neighborhoods, this component doesn't have to be in the plan. It could go away altogether, but by giving specific attention to different neighborhoods, it enables the city to kind of focus in on what are the needs of each region of the city, and gives a little bit of direction as opposed to just a scatter shot. Hope we get it for the whole town, all at large. And also, establishing these neighborhoods, as I mentioned, it also creates that sense of civic pride that people can have in their region. And so, we took our best shot at, identifying what neighborhood boundaries would be, and those, aren't cut in stone by any means, but the goal was to identify what makes each of these places special, how they are different from each other, where they sort of stop and end, and what are their needs specifically. A lot of them share the similar needs in terms of some of the non-physical improvements, but others have very specific needs that we identify in the plan. So, and then, in all of those layers put together, and what sort of the vision, the concept of the future role in terms of its built infrastructure. The third chapter really gets at how do we implement this, and it lays out some action plans related to these different elements: land use, transportation, economic development, housing, and parks and recreation, with different strategies of how this vision can be accomplished. And so each of those sections has some distinctive strategies, and which can then be taken one step further using this plan to then enact policy. So land use identifies its strategies, has a detailed future land use map, which incorporates the zoning map, but it informs the zoning changes later. The transportation section has its own strategies, particularly in connections to the redeveloped areas and within and through them, but also along the major corridors and throughout the neighborhoods on other important roads and connectors. Economic development has its own strategies. And a lot of that is really surrounding the mixed use code and the redevelopment of downtown. We're already on a great path towards implementing and making that change. The housing section has its own strategies for addressing the moderate income housing requirements for the state. So these are items which have been identified by me working with our housing consultant as strategies in which the city can meet those requirements. And then Parks and Recreation. Recognition, we did a really detailed analysis of this. And there's a lot of numbers and figures and facts that I'm not going to go into. But generally what we found looking at your park system is you have a really great structure to it. What we heard from the community was most folks would just like to see a little bit more amenity. Looking at your population growth, there is going to be some growth in the near future, but there is a desire for maybe some more parks. And so given that you're almost built out, whatever land you can get now only serves better because it's limited and it's running out. But all this is to say that when we identify all these different future parks and trails, it's not to say that the city is bound to write a check for all these, but these are places, neighborhoods where they could be well served. Some neighborhoods are a little bit more park rich than others. So these future parks are kind of sited in different neighborhoods where maybe they could benefit from a small park or a trail. So this was the proposed park map. This is the existing proposed trails. Trails. Shopping when you take it in whole, but that would be if you were paying for it all out of pocket. There's so many different ways that can be done. But the reality is you're not gonna have to bond for 18 million. But the whole point is it's to give a vision and a strategy for that department to work towards. The design and planning toolbox is something we have typically done in most general plans. But as we worked through and developed the concept for what the city could be, we felt it was important to put this in as sort of just a compilation of ideas and tools which can be drawn on and thoughts for the future. They could be, all of them or none of them could be implemented, but they're there to kind of give this extra layer of vision. They look at everything from program enhancements, things that are kind of non-physical in nature, to actual physical enhancements. Some which are done publicly, through streetscapes and things like that. Like connector cross-section shows. Others are, done through the private realm, which is kind of more enacted in the code requirements on there. Here, that's what the list of all these are. We wanted to explore that and how each neighborhood could be enhanced by these things. And so each neighborhood we took a closer look at, and here's what we call the Arsenal Villa neighborhood. There's a list of various enhancements, and we identify some specific spots in which these things could occur for that neighborhood to improve that neighborhood and beautify it, make it strong. So, so That's pretty much what's in the meat of the plan. The appendices hold mostly analysis of what we found, more of the detailed facts and figures and how we arrived at these conclusions, as well as a more detailed summary of our work with the public and the comments that we heard. But in general, that's a summary of the plan. So, you want to add, Steve?
No. So kind of a brief introduction of what the plan is. And, granted, didn't go through every chapter, every page, but kind of gives you a general overall concept of what the plan is. I kind of wanted to open up for questions, and I'm looking more for big dramatic questions, not that, the word 3 was misspelled or something. I can get with that, later. Those are things that we can do kind of day to day, but it's, are there big glaring things in there that you have questions for? Again, that's why I have him here. Again, my budget only allows me this meeting, and after that, I don't get him anymore. He'll make some modifications to the plan that we come up with, and then my budget's done. So any big questions or concerns regarding, neighborhoods or plans in those neighborhoods, or?
Let me offer, if you're talking about big things. What's interesting, and I guess I just need to pick out which one maybe we ought to talk about to kind of set the stage. Well, let me jump into this part of it. Maybe this would be probably the best part. I'll be honest with you, I went page by page and I looked at everything word by word, paragraph by paragraph. And there's a lot of great stuff here, okay? The challenge is, and I'll just kind of give you my perspective. The challenge is it's got some really good stuff in chapter 1 really is just more of a kind of a little bit of a background. Chapter 2 talks about the vision. Chapter 3 talks about the implementation, and the appendix 1, okay, has everything. It has recommendations, the strategies, it has it all kind of buried up in there. And what I found is that, and I'll give you a good example. If you look at land use, and we're looking primarily at the 6 elements, there's action plans for land use and urban design found in implementation of the plan. So if you look at chapter 3, that's where it's found. And it also has the strategies in there. But when I went in and looked at the parks, recreation, and trails, it had an action plan, but it didn't have the strategies. The strategies, or it calls them out in the plan in the appendix, as goals, policy, and implementation pages. So in page 128 through 30, it really has the meat of what we want to do in terms of the parks and rec. But that's found in the appendix, where other ones, for an example, housing, the action plans and the strategies on page 31 are really in the implementation. So we kind of have them, some here in implementation, and others really kind of focus and in depth in the appendix, okay? So you have to kind of know where to go look to find those. I would have thought that might have been better had we brought some of those goals, policy, implementation pages that really talks about the crux of what to do and put those under implementation, because implementation is really what you do. You go to the implementation, here's what you got to do. So that may be one piece that we can talk. I was really impressed with the design and planning toolbox you just mentioned with. They're on page 36 to 69. And interesting enough, I don't know what to do with it. You can help us define what to do with that, because if the design and planning box then says it's a tool where you can actually kind of bring all of this stuff together, and here's how you can kind of frame it, then maybe just a little clear understanding of how that toolbox fits in terms of providing implementation to strategies or goals. That would be helpful. I don't know how deep you want me to go into this, Steve, but how I approached it, to be really blunt with you, is I went through page by page. And if you would like to talk page by page, I could surely hit on the big ones. And then we can draw, maybe let this one, to be interesting, to be honest with you, I only found one misspelled word.
It's not the same one Diane pointed out.
One. And that's incredible. This is 183 pages plus, and I only found one. So to me, it's not a misspelled word, it's just kind of clarification. But tell me what you'd like to, how you want to orchestrate or talk about this. And then I need to turn to the council. And I just want to talk to the council about what they need to be thinking about as we move forward. So how do you want to approach this?
It's up to you. Again, I've got him for the big items. I can deal with the details.
Okay,
You can go through the details with me. Because again, he'll modify the current document, and send it to me, and then I can, modify kind of like we did with the mixed use code.
Okay.
They provided the big thing, and then we went through it item by item. So if there's a chapter or a section or a portion that you'd like to talk about, I don't know what I know Andy wants to stay for 3 hours, so.
no, I don't want to do that. Let me offer this thought. I have a document here that basically, it breaks this document into 3 components. The red document, the red marks, and I made red marks, are really a contractor perspective to help us understand. Not a lot of those, but there are some in there. The other one talks about what council, what do you want to do? And let me give you, for example, later, deeper into the document, you're going to see some comments in there that says this. We need to add, and by the way, you got to help me a little bit in clarification, because one part of it talks about 54 acres of needed parks. Another part talks about 28 acres. Okay, so I just need to make sure I know which one that is. Well, let's assume it's 28 acres and not 54 more acres to meet the demands. There are portions of land today that are vacant. They're just vacant. And I think when you did your analysis, you simply says, hey, here's an acre or 2 acres of property that's open, and it happens to be somewhat co-located in a particular type of area where we have a need for more parks. If in fact we, and I'm not talking about we, but the council believes that really we need, if we're going to do something, we need to get with that landowner, and at least over the next 4 or 5 years, talk about acquiring that property before it's built out, because it will be built out. Then the issue is going to be is I'd like to get the council to say, are you okay with basically looking and having the city approach this landowner and look at the possibility over the next maybe 2 or 3 years that the city consider purchasing this land for some future park as outlined in the general plan? Because if you don't do that, it's going to go into residential and you'll lose that. I guarantee it'll be gone, and any future parks that are maybe a problem. So we need direction from the council.
Well, I think a question that goes along with that is, for the city-owned parks, do we need any more? I feel like we have sufficient for our needs.
Likewise.
But if we have developers that are putting in big developments, maybe on the Hanson property, or can we tie some type of park in with that development next to the cemetery? Or if there's going to be a mixed use uptown, that they bring in some green space with it. I don't know that the city needs to own more parks. I'd much rather put it on the developer as you're
Right.
developing an area, that you build some green space into it.
Right, will look like what we did on 1900 across from the Herefordshire there, and I just went blank on, I think it's the Orchard condominiums or Orchard those, that we have a public park there, correct? But it was put in there by the developer.
Right, but that was so he can get density bonus points. That's why he opened it up for public. He could have
but it
closed,
worked.
he could have closed it, made it only for his development, and it wouldn't be a.
And he probably wouldn't have got the density bonus points that he got, so it probably wouldn't have won as dense as he wanted, which we have the exact opportunity to do the same thing over on the Hanson property. The other concern I had with like parks and that is, I look at these trail systems, we're adding a lot of north-south trails. I really believe we need more east-west trails because we have the greatest thing. We have the DNRG trail, but we're not making a lot of, I can't get on my bike at my house and have a safe path to the train station. That's why I can't walk there within means. I can't ride there within means. And so I would much rather see us tie east-west stuff into the trail and not build a bunch of more north-south stuff.
Well, and that's the conversation.
You know, the north-south stuff are easy pickings. I mean, it's just getting with the Layton Canal Company or Howard Slough and, you know, building those trails. Those are the easy ones, north and south. The east-west are the most difficult because we've got a barrier,
But they're the most hard.
but we got a barrier that we got to deal with. So it's, you know, 5600 south, we have an opportunity when they widen that to have a trail going east-west to get you from downtown along, which would help you in your want to bike to work.
Well, anybody that's on the west or the east of the DNR trail, I would benefit from having something that tied their neighborhood into the trail.
So a lot of that thought was, how do we get them and where can we get them? And I know there was one about 4400 south to cross over the rail trail, the railroad to get to the trail.
Yep.
But again, that's a cost. And the barrier is that railroad that's going to cost us $1 million just to even think about crossing over it.
So focus on your main corridors. 5600 will probably take care of itself with our partnership with UDOT. But then what about 6000? What about 4800? What about
You know,
4,000?
Our complete streets policy that we have, when we update a new road, we have to look at those opportunities. Can we put in a bike lane? Can we put in this? Can we put in that? So as we redevelop those roads, and they've identified 6,000, 48, 4,000, 31, 43, all the city-owned big roads, as we develop them, can we put in a bike lane? Can it be separated or is it part of the road? Can it, you know, those are things we look at staff level. Can we get those bike lanes? 56 is kind of just the great things falling in our lap.
Right.
We don't have to do a lot, but again, even on 4,048, we're dealing with Union Pacific, UDOT to get across those to make them better.
So the question you have to ask, and this is where we just need to kind of figure out how we want to start this conversation. Everything we just talked about is in this document, every bit of it. And so the pieces that we basically believe as council and staff, and with the public input you've already put, can we find then a clarification on page 30 that simply says, yeah, this is something we want to go forward with? Or do we believe it really is not applicable? And if it's not applicable, remove it. And it's the clarity as we walk through the document then to make the document the real document you want and the document you think is going to look 10, 15 years into the future, the document you're ready to vote on and approve. Because this is important. If you read the document, and you may not have read it, but if you read the general plan writing guide, one of the interesting things it calls out there that, and by the way, that document was basically written by Workforce Services Office, which has a lot to do with affordable housing, a lot of things, not to get the details. It basically calls out some interesting things that I think we need to talk about. One, it says that you need to identify some actions. So if you're going to talk about wanting to put a park, and you want to put that park that happens to be on 6,000, and there is a piece of property you guys found, I had no idea it was there, but you found it. Should we go to the owner, and I bet you I know who that owner is, and say, we want to talk about acquiring your park. So when you sell it, at least give us a shot at it. And if you say, yeah, I think that makes sense, then that puts actionable items on the city that says, we'll reach out. We won't buy it this year. We may not buy it for 5 years. But if we know that you basically have it in the plan and we need to consider it, then every budget cycle, we'll find out the price. And if the owner's ready to sell, then we will have a price that says, we want to reach out and acquire that property. Because someday we want to put a park there. But you got to tell us that. And it's in your document. If you like what you see, leave it in there. Then what we put is an actions on that. And the most important, and you're probably going to appreciate this one, the guide simply says, who's responsible? Because to me, if you put it over to the city and you says, we need to look at that, then I would like to say, okay, that's perfect. We go to Matt. Matt, who's your Parks and Recreation guy? Okay. So Travis then is one of his plans as the Director of Parks and Recreation. Each year, knowing that the general plan says, hey, keep an eye out for this park. The city council says they want it, maybe not this year, maybe not in 3 or 4 years, but every year he's going to pulse to make sure if that park becomes available, then he can at least approach the city council who's sitting there and simply says, you asked and said you wanted us to get this property. It's now available, buy it before they start building houses on it. And then a choice can be made. And if the choice is, no, we no longer want it, that's fine. But at least it's actionable because of what this council says. We want you to look forward 4, 5, 6 years and think about it in 4, 5, 6 years to be able to do something. That's the beauty of this document. But we need to put somebody responsible to watch it. That's important, okay? So this thing's got a lot of great stuff in it. I'm just going to ask you fundamentally, couldn't we basically literally walk this thing page by page? You've read it, I've read it 3 times, okay? I like what I see, and simply says, hey, page 13, what do you think? And you'll say, I like this. Or this piece really doesn't fit. And let's go back to the comment that was made earlier, and this is an important one. This proposal says we're going to move to put a bridge over UP line out of right there somewhere in around that train station. That's a bold statement. I like it. If we think that's important, and I think it is, because we can provide safe passage to this train station, literally across there, so it's not just 5,600, but a safe package for people, then let's talk about grants. Let's talk about funding. Let's find out who we have to talk to figure out how to make that happen. They certainly did it in Farmington. If you get off that train station in Farmington, you get on a unit that goes over that track and allows you then to get into that Farmington station area. Safe. We can do the same thing here if the council agrees that that stays in the general plan and we need to work towards that. But that's your decision. And it's in there. The question is, do you want to leave it in there or do you want to remove it? Because if it's left in there, then we work to make it happen because you've approved this to work to make this happen. May not happen in my lifetime, may not happen while I'm on watch, but it's in your plan. And if we're not telling the future, you're telling the future, at least please consider this as we go forward over the next 5, 10, 15 years. And I say, then it works perfectly for its intended design. Are you okay with that strategy?
I like going through it page by page. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of scattered throughout the document. And so if
It
we
is.
can highlight it, then maybe there's a way for us to bring it together. So there's one summary point and make it a little more consistent. And so there's a reference when it talks about something, then you can actually have an injunction that's,
Isn't that the
specifically
purpose
does
of the appendix?
right. I think there are a few things we could add to the appendix and that sort of thing, but keep it so it's a little more consistent maybe. And by doing it page by page, I think we can start highlighting some of those things, work together, as well as the general principles that need to be addressed.
Well, then I ask you this question. I certainly have this whole thing, at least everything up until you get to the public comments, 183 pages. It's in this presentation. If I gave it to you, and I'll give it to you, okay? And if you look at the things that I've marked in red, and I'll show you what I mean when you look at the chart, those are all things that I think the contractor is probably best suited to answer. And we can just methodically walk through this. And I think we can knock half this thing out before we go home here in 10 minutes. No, I'm just
Yes,
kidding.
I like your optimism.
Well, at least it gets us engaged in this process. And then you'll have, when you get done, you will have a document that when we present it in front of you, it's had your input, your comments, you flush this out, you'll have a document that'll be a living document, but more importantly, one you can simply says, yes, everything you've wanted is in there, and we go for the vote. And then there won't be a debate about, well, we missed this or we missed that. You have flushed this thing out. Remember, this thing's been running for 3 years.
Well, you just made an interesting statement, right? Because is this not just a living document?
It is a living document.
So if it's a living document, as a council, we can modify it on the fly.
Exactly. But here's the secret, and this is the most important part of this. This document has to go through the planning commission. If you modify this document, you have to basically give a direction to Steve, to staff, and they'll run it back, you with your idea, run it back through the planning commission, make recommendations and bring it back to you. And that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, that's the purpose of the planning commission. But to me, if you can get this as close to right as you like it, and let's say next year, you simply says, man, I think we need to adjust that, need to add this, need to do something else with it. Then I suggest to you is do it, make a recommendation. If 3 of you right here basically says, I think that's a great idea, then we direct staff to run it back through the planning commission, because this document, much like all land use documents, have to go through the planning commission first with a recommendation back to the council. We flush it back through them.
Has it already happened? I mean, we already taken this through the planning commission or no?
As
The planning
is.
commission is recommending.
Okay, that's, I just want to make sure, yes. So they've already said this is good as far as
Yeah.
their litmus.
Everything that's in front of you, as written.
And so their position is, this is what we'd like you to consider.
So I guess from that perspective, Mayor, are there any absolute, from your vantage, because I went through all of your notes.
Yes.
There's no showstoppers, and I'll use a term that we use in my industry. Showstopper means we cannot proceed forward without it causing complete and total detrimental harm or inability to.
Oh, no, and the reason why is because as Steve said right at the very beginning, he said this. No, he didn't, you did. You said that this particular document is simply an advisory document driven by state law. But it's an advisory document
Right.
that basically you use as a tool to direct what you want done and direct in the future. It's not an ordinance.
Right.
And because it's not an ordinance, it's not backed by law. So you could take it today, approve what you see, come back over the next 6 or 8 months. And if you see things you want to change, run it back through the planning commission. They evaluate your recommendations and we can update it. I was only going to offer this. This has been in process 3 years.
I know, I've been to 3 or 4 town hall or open houses on this personally myself before coming onto the council. So I know it's been bantered about.
It's really had a lot of input, but I will tell you, and I'm only speaking from Bob Dandoy's perspective, there is not a more important document, in my opinion, for the city council to look at and approve than this document. And here's the reason why. Is because you know today what you see is important today. In 10 years, there'll definitely be a whole new mayor. There'll definitely could be many all new city council members. It is the conduit that ties today, once you approve it, to the future. And I share that with you only because of one thing, and I'll just use one example. Travis probably has some history. Travis, you still back there?
Absolutely. Are you awake?
No, he is. I haven't bored him out yet. There is a proposal in here that cuts a road over the top of a field in Emerald Russell Park. It's a road lined with trees, okay? Now, on the surface of that, that's maybe not a bad idea. It's 7 feet tall, so you have to go up over that hump, run it across that field and drop down the other side, and you got to buy a house to take through to get the road to go there. And on the surface, you say, hey, that's not a bad idea. But here's the problem. Emerald Russell Park is sitting on an old dump. And I guarantee you, I put 3 mattresses in that dump. And I can
That's why
see
it's,
a truck.
That
why
explains
it's-
a lot. That
that's why
explains a lot.
The soccer fields are sinking every year.
So
It's your
I
fault.
can see these guys, either they dig down to road base or build a road without running over those cotton picking mattresses. But more importantly, they may have sealed that dump. Now, you can't build houses on it. It's perfect to what it is. But if you dig into that hump that's there, you're going to hit garbage.
But instead of making that cut that's proposed, if you look at Emma Russell, there's a big sidewalk that goes down and then it turns and goes over to the pavilion. But constantly Parks and Rec and during activities and that are driving over to the parking lot.
Yes.
Why not just put a sidewalk and then that connects it?
Perfect.
All you gotta do is put a bigger sidewalk right there and you don't have to do anything major.
And that's the critical part of this. You know that. I'm saying 10
Because I
years
walk
from
it
now,
every day.
15 years from now, when somebody else is sitting in your shoes and this comes up, they may say, hey, we ought to put that road over the top. And they may not know, because Travis doesn't work here anymore in 10, 15 years. They may not know that we put that over a dump. And they will not know until they plow into it and find that mattress I put in there. You see my point?
Yeah.
You have that knowledge today.
Let's hear what Steve's
And
point
you can
is.
make that work. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, the mayor pointed it out, and I want to reemphasize it. This is a 50,000-foot level look at the city. What is our hope and desire? Desire is to have some sort of rail or road going through. Is it happening, or could it happen? I don't know, because that's the on the ground look at it. Conceptually, it's a great idea. You said it yourself, Mayor. It's conceptually, it's a great idea. Now, to build a road, and Travis or Ross can correct me, you gotta do an environmental study. They'll find the dump. You gotta do an impact study. You'll find the dump. So all those things on the ground will happen at the time someone says, hey, let's do it.
Right.
So conceptually, it's a thought, having some sort of road connecting. It doesn't have to be right at that location. You know, you got trails and arrows going across people's, it's not right at that direct. It's the thought of somewhere, get a bridge over, or somewhere, get a road through, somewhere, somehow, at some point. It's not right through Joe and Sophie's property. It's, well,
Not all your ideas are good ideas.
Okay, so what's the purpose of the road? I mean,
I think the neighborhood wanted more connections to it. Because 57 right now is just a dead end, right?
okay. To get to the park, you mean?
Yes.
So from the north, they can't get in without going all the way around.
All the way
The
around.
traffic you will create through that park
Well,
is not
again,
the cut through the
It's
park.
a concept. Reality may never happen.
Right.
I mean,
If UDOT has their way, the other end of 5700 will be a dead end too.
There's truth in
is
that.
that bad?
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
No.
But here's the key. Here's the key to that comment. Some of that makes really good sense in here. I've read this document. It's really good. I'm just saying is, some of it doesn't. And if you trigger Wasatch Civil to go in there and says, I'm thinking I would like to put a road in there, and they go up there and find there's a dump, somebody's gonna invest a lot of money for waste a lot of money. I'm saying is, and it's your decision, I'm just pointing it out. Do you want to basically take a road, do you want to propose somewhere in the future, a road to cross over the top of that dump? To me, and that's why I asked Travis to be here. Travis has park requirements. He has people that uses that park. I promise you, you cut a road through there, he's going to lose some of that ability to use that park. I'd like to have him also, when he sees that, says, Travis, are you okay with that? And tell you what he thinks as the Parks and Rec director. And if he basically says, man, I don't think
I
that's
think
gonna
I've
work.
read in here that we're 54 in some sections, 54 acres short of appropriate green space, some sections 46 acres, some 28 sections.
Yeah.
Short of green space. I would not recommend giving up any green space.
Well, yeah, but I don't disagree with you, but here's an interesting part about that. I like the proposal. You said, why don't we take a park that is not too far from your house? It happens to be run by the Weber Water District. It's next to that big pond. And if you look at it, there's a pretty good piece of property there they own. There's no reason why, and they're proposing it. Why shouldn't we consider asking the Weber Water District to see if we can use it?
To address that specifically, there are certain pieces of property, that being one of them, that I think we should definitely consider.
Exactly.
My parents live 4 houses away from that.
I like that.
I think it's fantastic. I asked my mom about it. She's like, absolutely. It would make absolute sense because it's just dead ground there right now.
And Randy, if you give us directions as a city to approach Weber Basin, that maybe this year we start the groundwork and in 2 years we can finalize the park there. That's exactly what the general plan's intended to do. Now we put a park in a neighborhood that doesn't have a park.
Right.
And it works perfectly. But you got to tell us, and this general plan becomes the guide to make that work. That's the critical part. It's the guide that makes that work. So here's what I would offer, okay? If it's okay with you. I'd like to basically just give you my presentation. It's 183 pages, okay? It identifies all the stuff, okay? Those things that are marked in red, I think are contractor. But Steve, you and the contractor can look at that. Some of those, council, it's your decision. It's your decision. It's not the contractor, not even staff. It's your decision whether we proceed. Some of that, Matt, is a staff decision. And you got to say, do you want to put that in there or not? And if, at the end of the day, if we get through this document, we'll have all the principal parties to basically step up and says, this is a general plan we can live with. And here's why that's so important. And I'll shut up after this comment, maybe. I don't know how many of you have read the 2002 general plan. And if you did, you're going to be pretty disappointed on two fronts.
Thanks, Dan. His name is in it.
Okay. And here's the reason why you're gonna be disappointed, and I'll clarify, particularly if y'all had an opportunity to write it or be part of it. One is, there was some really good things in there that never got done. Let me make that absolutely clear. Never got done, never got considered. And there's some things in there that should have been changed years ago, particularly the one that says we need to put a TOD, a transit-oriented development, front runner station at that location. That 2002 document, the document is fact on the books today and about to be changed, still calls out that we put a train station in Roy. That train station has been here for years and years and years, and that general plan should have been amended to reflect that. It didn't. Now, why does that happen? And here's why it doesn't happen. Because if the general plan is not treated as a tool by which you look at, you set budgets to, that you use as it's designed to do, to set the future in motion and change the future as you need to, then it's just a simple document, and all you've done is you simply checked the square that says you've got a general plan. And guess who's the only person ever looks at that? Steve. Because every time you do a zone change, he's got a future land map, and I've seen it up there, it was a good one, okay? We want to talk about that one too. He has to approve, you have to approve for him to change that future land use map. And so he has to do that. That is the only time I've ever seen the 2002 general plan in motion, is when he puts it in motion. True story.
We adopted the focus really into it.
Yeah, I know that might.
As for the train station, I don't want to change the document saying, take it right out, because it was a concept that they had back then. So in that case, yeah, it is a check mark. We've got that done. They're talking about it. So it's very similar to this. If all of a sudden we do a bunch of things, I'm not going to remove it out of the plan. We'll just check, we've done
When you
that.
checked it off, it's been completed.
Right.
So
So
exactly what the general plan allows you to do. It simply says, here's something you want to do. Council, staff, do you want to do this? It's in the budget. When staff finishes it, you simply says, we mark it completed. Who's assigned to do it? Travis, Ross, Mayor, Matt, Pick, Steve. We go and says, okay, that's your action on this budget cycle. They complete it, we finish, and it's checked off, it's done.
Taken out of the document?
Doesn't have to take it out,
Just-
only shows that it's completed.
Okay.
So if we ever do an update back through the planning commission, it will come back and it will indicate that project was completed. That's the beauty of this general plan. It's the most important document in Roy City. We need to make sure we do it right. That's my point.
just one little last thing, and some of you've heard me say this. Central Park in New York. I'm not gonna ask who's been there, but everybody knows about it. Did you know there was a time that they didn't even want that? It was put in a plan as a concept to have a park to help people with open space. People fought about it, not wanting it. It was put in a plan. It didn't happen for 30 years, but it was in a plan. And if it's not in a plan, it will never happen. It'll never be thought of. So because someone kept it in there, the city saw its value. Now, can someone tell me if they can afford anything facing Central Park? No, the highest rent rates in the world are facing a park that people did not want. So it's a concept. So even if the concept of the road going through Emma Russell, it won't happen right at that location, but if the concept of somehow having some sort of connection is the thought, that's what it's for, is the thought, not right at that location. Sam didn't know there was a dump,
I'm okay with that. That makes sense.
but you
Makes
know,
sense.
it's one of those, it's a concept thought. At 50,000 feet, you're not looking at the details, counting the leaves, counting the weeds, counting the, the street markers. It's, does this make sense? A bridge over the Union Pacific Railroad to get to the front runner station, to connect trails. Those are the thoughts.
The proposed parks are not about specific sites. They're really about, this neighborhood doesn't have a park. Where can you put it?
Yeah, there's a couple on here that are proposed that there's parks within less than a mile. So,
And there's a provision in there, which I kind of like, that basically says the objective would be is you need to connect them. So everybody in Roy City, and Joe talked about this a little bit, he says, we need much more east and west connectivity, not so much north and south. And the purpose of that was, the document says, that one of the things we should be doing is find ways by everybody is connected within a certain distance from the park. Now, that's going to be a little more difficult, but if we use the streets, sidewalks as a connectivity to those parts, we can connect everybody to the park. If that's the objective you want, we can make that happen. So, are we okay with this strategy then?
yeah, well, one quick question, because I think I'm the only one that has, because I asked for your markup. Or who does? Or I guess, and this is our last engagement with you, correct?
Not mine, but yours, yes.
Technically under-
So my point being is you have a lot of red that would be pushed back on him. Is that going to in turn be pushed back on Steve to correct in terms of what you've gone through and marked up?
Well, that's I think where Steve and the contractor has to assess that. But let's look at the other side of this conversation. Are you willing to go back and look at extending the contract? Steve's comment through this conversation has been, I'm running out of money. He's got Wasatch Front Regional Council donations. Roy City donated to help make this happen. So we're basically at the end of financially the contract.
Just a Wasatch Front actually extended it a little bit
Did they
more
already?
without us having to contribute, but I'm running out of their money.
So my comment to you would be is, if you think, and you got to set some of the input, my comment maybe is we send the information to Steve. Collectively put all our stuff in his lab. Let him sit down with the contractor and look at the things that basically he can make some adjustments to. And then the rest of it, Steve will have to work. But if he needs to come back and tell us as a council, says, hey, I'd like to continue this, but to do this, I need an extra certain amount of money to proceed, then he's got to come in with the request through Matt. Matt then approaches you, you agree to it, we do a budget adjustment, and gives him the extra money to be able to continue until this is done. 3 years this has been in work, okay? We've expended a lot of money to get to this point.
So what I hear you saying is that the recommendations in your draft would go through there, then it would come back, and that's when we start our discussion?
Because you put them in there, he'll look at the consolidation of all of our inputs, and then he can look at the things that the contractor will do, and he can negotiate those changes that we collectively look at, and then we can walk through those, and then we task the contractor to go ahead and make those updates.
So we're gonna make discussion before you input your
Oh,
draft. Is that what
Here's,
you're?
yeah, before he does anything, you all have to agree.
Yeah.
So if this takes another session,
Yes, please.
then we put it through another session. Maybe the contractor doesn't have to be to that session. We flush this out.
I think
We
there needs to be
consolidate
some
back to
discussion.
Steve. Steve works with the contractor, makes the adjustments that he can, and then we've got a document ready to move forward. Does that sound reasonable with you?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, what's the city thus far out in terms of what we've expended for,
$65,000.
I mean, rough estimate, spitball, what would we be talking if we had to extend out for another meeting like this, a rehash of what we have? Because at present, we have something that the planning commission has signed off on and said, this meets our standards, and we're really just getting into the minutia. And again, I go back to your statement, it is a living document, which we have the ability, if something comes up, to go through and effectively modify it will.
But the planning commission goes at it from a different perspective. We need to look at it now because we represent the citizens, and citizens will have a different concept. So
But
why
that's the
we
thing.
Can't just rely on that.
Citizen input has been going on for 3 years. I know
Well-
because I participated in it.
Okay, but it hasn't changed. The citizen input hasn't allowed it to change. The citizen input will come from us to allow it to change.
So and I guess that's my question is what do we?
Hasn't citizen input went into this?
Oh, yes.
I was gonna say,
I mean,
that's,
like I said, I've gone to 3 open houses on this.
But it hasn't changed since the open house. The open house was a
Well,
presentation.
it
Well,
has.
yeah.
All the input that's been gathered is in that right now.
Yeah, because I'm getting what's,
Well, I didn't see much, when I went page by page, I saw a few words change, but I didn't see a lot of concepts change.
The first draft was accumulation of 90% of the comments.
Well, that's what I'm
The
saying.
Living room.
Yeah, but we're
discussions,
talking about
the
from planning commission
voting
now to
days,
us.
Well, because the planning commission, when they went through it, and they had public meetings with the public,
public
received
comment,
some comments,
open
had a
houses.
public hearing, we received 3 comments, and the 3 people are in this room. All asking to approve it.
Well, good, let's
Kind of hard
start
to make
discussing it.
changes when they say, we like it, approve it.
So is today the day we start discussing specifics right now? Or do we wait till the next one or?
To me, we're sitting at 6:40. Okay, we've now invested 1 hour and 45 minutes in this. Mike, excuse me, invested 1 hour and 15 minutes in this. But we got to have a cutoff point. We can surely start the conversation to kind of set the direction. And then if we like what we're doing and we walk through the first few pages, that'll give us kind of a tone of how we're going to approach it. And then we reconvene and we finish that dialogue. And then when we're done, everything goes back to Steve. We make those adjustments. And then he sits down with the contractor and the contractor and Steve finalize the document to the extent within the funds available. If it doesn't meet the funds requirements, he may come back and ask for additional funds.
So some of my questions would be, Diane, is if you have citizen comment, why weren't they made beforehand?
Why didn't the citizens comment then? You know, I don't know what
It's
the,
like that's what the planning commission was doing, was reaching out to the public. Give us your comments, give us your comments, give us your
I
comments.
had people talk to me after the town hall presentations we had, and then some people that have talked to me about it since they've read it. So I don't know if their input was put into place, but the documents I've seen didn't reflect that. So I don't know why things weren't changed after that or before that.
What's there, just, and remember, and this is an important part of the conversation. You're the conduit to the citizens. You really are. And at the end of the day, ultimate responsibility for the approval of this document rests with the 5 of you. And it's what comes out of your decision that decides how this general plan will be. It sounds like, Diane, some residents have approached you and offered some more insight, more input. And you're now, as a representative of the citizens, you want to put that into the document or have that conversation.
Absolutely.
And that's fine. And it may very well be the other 4 of you, including Ann, who's not here, have had that same interaction, and that's okay. That's the whole purpose of working this document to make sure. Remember, the planning commission has had this for a long time. They have been working this and working this and working this. My comment to you would be is, it's now your turn. But at the end of the day, they make recommendations. At the end of the day, you finalize what's going to be in here, and that's the decision. And that's how it works.
And I comment on that, like, we can go through this and approve this. And the next day, I'm gonna get 2 emails saying, hey, what about this and this and this? And that's okay. Like, that's why it moves.
In living document.
And so I think you do have to kind of have a cutoff point because you're always going to have emails,
Yep.
texts, like you're always going to have that,
Correct.
which is good. That's what we
exactly
want.
right.
That's what we want.
right.
So, but you've got to have a point where you say, you know, this is where we're going.
That's right.
So I think we're here to start. We can at least get started now.
I
It's
know.
finally here at city council.
Well, and at some point in time, it'll obviously take another work session. We may have 2 more work sessions. But when you say we're done, we're done. And that's the line in the sand. It gets approved based on that finalized. And Sophie, if somebody comes in a week later and says, man, I'd sure like to see that general plan, and you agree and you convince 2 others, it goes back to Steve, and Steve then goes back to the planning commission, and it runs through that process back to recommendation for you.
Absolutely.
Right, and that goes back to my statement of it's a living document. I'm gonna beat that into the ground because it can be changed if and when there's something that we see that is amiss with it.
Exactly. And just to make this point real clear, so there's no confusion. If you simply say, and you decide, I'm gonna approve it as is. I'm gonna approve it as is. Just, that's what I'm gonna decide. It gets the document baseline today. Contractor's now finished, okay? Contractor's done. And then you come back and simply says, now I want to tweak it. We can spend the next 6 or 8 months tweaking it. And then it's going to go back to Steve, okay? Steve then has to send it back to the planning commission. Planning commissioner looks at the information, makes the review, because remember, it's baseline, it's now done, and then we want to modify it. So that's it. I would just suggesting is, I'd like to get it done, and the day you vote on it, that is the baseline of this document going forward. And then if you see any requirements to change it going in the future, perfect.
Correct.
We just run it through the process. You have some choices.
Sure. Yeah, I guess from, just to respect Diane's, what is do you have like a summed up or typed up, whatever, like the citizens have called out for you?
Yeah, I've got some topics, but I thought we were gonna go through it page by
Well,
page.
oh,
and so
I sure
thought
as
we
heck
were
hope
going
not.
to-
180 some odd pages?
It's really up to them. It's how you want to work through it.
I mean,
I get
I'm happy-
PowerPointed to death for a living. Sure, let's do it if that's what we think is
All
gonna
right.
serve us best. But at the end of the day, we've been kicking this down the road for 3 years.
I agree.
Okay, but you haven't been there. The city council hasn't been there to have the voice in it. And that's why we need to move forward. Let's move forward.
As I say, I participate, go ahead and, provide that.
Let's move forward.
Agreed.
This is an updated version. So do me a favor. Take this document. Can you?
I actually don't have the old school USB port on this.
Do you need a dongle? Do you have a USB-C port? I
He
got
just called you old, Mayor. I heard it.
Hang on.
Just send it to me.
Okay.
Sorry.
School.
They're phasing out the USB-A.
I had floppy disks. I don't remember what floppy disks.
I know one we're good at.
Probably bigger than 5.5.
I still got them.
Wow. Do you want to say that out loud?
Good for once.
Oh, yeah, I used the 5-inch ones.
Okay, I'll tell you what,
Oh,
you've got your
wow.
presentation done. I've got my
Did you use it
computer
for
up and running.
And I'm a millennial.
I can connect it up. We can see the first few of them. Trying to get a pattern.
Well, I thought
We can go by topics.
a bunch
I
of
mean,
little floppies.
I don't
you know,
really
with
care
the hard
how we go
cases.
about it.
Found a bunch of those. Yeah,
I
I
know.
found-
Okay, tell me how you want to go forward.
Show us to your kid.
I mean, I'm happy with
Just see if
any
they have
way you
equal
decide,
they
page
are.
by page or topics
so
or.
I say submit your comments that you have for you and anybody you represent, and let's compile them. And
Come back to the next
yeah,
meeting.
I don't want to sit here and go page by page, precept by precept, line by
And
line.
I don't know, like, I don't know that it's many.
Well,
If
okay.
you want to give them to me, I can at least mark it up
Okay.
that in a document that says, okay, this is what Sophie wanted or said, this is what Diane said, this
Sure.
is the mayor's
Yeah.
comments.
Yeah.
That sounds fine.
Randy, you okay with that
Yeah.
approach?
Totally fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Sounds good to
here's what
me.
we'll do then, okay? Take your document, if you need it in digital format, or if you just want to send them, just identify the page. Make your comments, send them to Steve. I will give Steve the updated version. The charts I have is 183 pages, okay? And not all of them have comments in them, but a lot of them do, and some have multiples. Then we'll consolidate all those, and the next meeting we have, we'll simply go page by page through the process. Now, remember, some sections are perfect. Leave them as they are, in my opinion, unless you have other comments. So we'll scan through those. Some of them are just going to ask you a simple question, council. Do you want to do this? And if I get 3 people that says, yeah, let's go forward, leave it as is. We move forward. If you basically says, no, I'm not sure I want to do that. I'll give you a good example. One of the elements in this proposal talks about block parties. Okay, block parties. Today, if a person wants to have the street blocked off, we have an ordinance that basically says you come in for a permit, fire department, or excuse me, police department, and that group has to pay the city to have a block party if they close the street. You may say, you know what? I want to get rid of that. If they want to have a block party, we're going to help them. We're going to support them. And we simply take that ordinance out and we no longer have it. Your choice. If you want to promote block parties, that's the kind of conversation we have. And all you got to do is say, yep, I like that. Nope, I don't like that. And we move on. Are you okay with all that? Page
Great.
by page. Some of that, you will not see any changes or recommendations. Some of them you'll see 2 or 3. That's the best way. Okay.
I look forward to all of your comments.
Send it to him as soon as you can, okay? Okay. Steve, any final before we talk to the
Nope.
council?
No, it's always good to have a discussion.
It's perfect. That's what this work session is all about. Council, do you have any comments? Anything you'd like to share before we ask for adjournment?
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Okay, I have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? Okay, we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, so here's what I'd like you to do. In part, gather your thoughts, send that to Steve. Steve will consolidate. We'll get this thing all wrapped up. Next meeting we'll try to work it. I want to try to get this done before we get into the budget cycle, because we got work sessions coming on budget. We need to get this wrapped up, okay? And may I ask this thought? Department heads, please, do me one favor. If you get a chance, look at the document, make sure you walk through it a little bit. This talks about you, and it talks about your organization. I really would think it's really important that you have some input to make sure that we advise the council on what makes sense and what doesn't. And if it makes sense, tell them that.